story behind national education reform is the same story as of all the other reforms we've seen since the Department of Education was created. And a lot of why that was formed was for equity measures, to make things equitable among all students. But what makes this a game changer is the stimulus money. So in March of 2009, the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund had 4 reforms geared towards social justice. It contained $53.6 billion of our tax dollars, and I wrote used against us. Pardon me, I was writing mine like too. So, what were states told to do? In the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund guidelines, it says spend the money quickly, which I found very interesting. So, is the goal student achievement? Simply put, the goal is to take from the haves and give to the have-nots. Secretary of State Arne Duncan said, "We have sought to fundamentally shift the federal role." And we've already had a pretty powerful federal role in education. So what does it mean to fundamentally shift that? President Obama has a roadmap for education reform. It's called the 2020 Vision Roadmap. You might have heard some people in our local media with the same name, 2020. So when you hear that on the radio, their ads, think about what they're connected to. In the 2020 Vision Roadmap, it details 3 main objectives. First, control education from the federal level. 2, compel states into wealth and resource distribution. And 3, and these are their words, direct remedy any failure to comply. So President Obama's Equity and Excellence Commission's 2-phase blueprint to federalize U.S. education starts like this. Phase 1, create the Common Core standards as a cross-governmental model framework to support resource redistribution. So they're going to bring all stakeholders together and bypass Congress. Phase 2, build a clearer, stronger framework that aligns local decisions with national commitments to equity and excellence. What does that mean? The redistribution of wealth and resources compelled by federal government requirements. So, you can read that on the very bottom, but it says they admit the real reason for national standards. It's to put us into the next phase, phase 2, wealth redistribution. So what will this mean for our local schools? Local decision-making is being eliminated so that the federal government can decide where states will redistribute students, teachers, principals, school resources, and local tax monies based on data collection and student test scores. So is it really about children? The Equity and Excellence Commission's report says this, and I found this highly offensive. The current system in which policy and resource decisions are made across 15,000 local school boards, 50 state legislatures and state education agencies, plus 3 branches of the federal government, is not serving national goals of equity and excellence, and is not meeting the needs of far too many children in too many communities. Historically, our approach to local control has often made it difficult to achieve funding adequacy and educational equity. Local authority will inevitably remain substantial, but it should operate within a clearer, stronger framework that aligns local decisions with state policies and national commitments to equity and excellence. So, as Allison was talking about, I didn't even know Allison before this all started, and it's not like we were political moms at all, but as we've learned more and more about what these education reforms will mean for our children, we've been reaching out to our representatives and legislators. And this has been my big question. Why don't some of our Utah leaders seem to see that recent Utah laws that they are actually implementing are taking away our local control? And I think it's because they aren't reading the blueprint. They saw the No Child Left Behind waiver, hey, we're going to adopt these higher standards, but they didn't read the entire reforms that were going to be taking place. And as Elisa alluded to, It's just a little bit here and a little bit more, kind of like the frog in the pot. So they didn't read the Race to the Top grants. Most of them haven't even still read our ESEA flexibility waiver. They haven't read the report from the Equity and Excellence Commission called For Each and Every Child. And many of them haven't even just gone to the White House website to look about what the 4 agenda items are for education reform. Inside the Race to the Top grant, you can find this language, and it refers to kind of what we're going to start seeing in this resource distribution. It says, ensuring equitable distribution of effective teachers and principals. 25 points states can get for that. There's another one this is in the Equity and Excellence Commission's report. The equitable distribution of highly effective, well-qualified teachers across districts and schools as a condition of federal funding. And I go back to what Allison said. I really believe the time is here for states to decide what they're willing to give up. I mean, is it more important that we educate our children the way that we see fit, or is it more important not to lose out on federal funding? So who decides what equity looks like in testing? David Coleman is known as the architect of Common Core standards. He was never a teacher. He's just kind of one of these education elites that he's a Rhodes Scholar, and he's been in education reform circles for a long time and has garnered a lot of respect among education reformers. So suddenly his organization called Student Achievement Partners gets a lot of Gates Foundation funding, and he's in a position of a lot of power. And this past spring, he was put in as the head of the college board. How did that happen?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did he have something to do with running the campaign for President Obama?
I haven't found that. I don't know.
As far as directing media change, affecting the way we think.
I don't know, but I'm going to go home and look into that.
Yeah.
Let me get your name afterwards.
Okay.
So he plans to change the SAT and all K-12 testing from an aptitude test to a test of knowledge specifically linked to the Common Core standards. That might sound kind of good, but when you actually start studying the values, the equity values, the social justice values of some of the people behind the testing, you start thinking, what kind of knowledge do they want our children to gain? And it kind of goes along with more of a, what you need to know to get a job, but not what you need to know to be great thinkers. Coleman believes informational text is more valuable to student learning than narrative reading and writing. By changing what is valued in testing, Coleman hopes to level the playing field for diligent, low-income students. So do we value the same things as David Coleman? Hillsdale College professor Dr. Daniel Coupland said this: if education has become, as Common Core openly declares, preparation for work in a global economy, then this situation is far worse than Common Core critics ever anticipated. And the concerns about cost and quality, and yes, even the constitutionality of Common Core, pale in comparison to the concerns for the hearts, minds, and souls of American children. Common Core makes its highest goal not literacy or wisdom, but career preparation. So who decides what Common Core tests actually test? I've become very familiar with a social justice education reformer by the name of Linda Darling Hammond. And the reason why her name popped out to me when I started researching Common Core was because I had already read one of her books. My school district, Canyon School District, assistant superintendent had asked that our school board read her book about equity for children. And when I read it, I thought, really? Is this the purpose of education? I was dumbfounded that they were touting this as something that they wanted to follow. So when I saw her name researching Common Core, I dug a little deeper. So She was President Obama's education policy advisor and is a well-known, well-connected social justice educator. She helped establish the parameters for the Common Core standards in her role over content specifications for Common Core testing at the federally funded Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortia. And that's the consortia that we got out of and then we partnered with. She co-wrote President Obama's Equity and Excellence Commission's report that we were just talking about, and she fixed much of the legislation that states are adopting to abide by Obama's 4 reform items: standards, testing, data collection, and school grading to force equitable resource distribution. So, do we know what Darling Hammond values? On January 31st of this year, Darling Hammond was exposed in a full day of Texas legislative hearings as one of the creators of a radical curriculum in Texas called C-Scope. Now, C-Scope, I don't know how many of you have heard of that, but you can go online and I wonder if I have flyers back there. Maybe I can pull it up if any of you are interested to go to the websites there. As a well-known educator in Texas who covered those legislative hearings, and I have the websites for that. And what came out of it was lesson plans that were pro-Islamic, pro-communistic, anti-American, and anti-Christian. So should this be concerning to parents when she has so much power over testing specifications? Guess who is the most powerful person behind teacher training and accreditation in the United States? Want to take a guess? You guessed it. Arguably the most powerful educator in policy making for teacher training and accreditation requirements. So when you think about what highly effective teachers means, according to the federal government, she created the National Commission on Teaching and America's Future, which led to sweeping policy changes affecting teaching in the United States. The Commission's 2006 report named her one of the most influential people affecting U.S. education and one of the nation's 10 most influential people affecting education policy over the last decade. Is this much power healthy for one person or for a republic? So I want to talk a little bit more about the public-private partnership that Allison mentioned. What that means for us, it means parents have no representation, we have no vote, and we have no say. When we start, when this lady and others of you start going to your local school boards, be prepared to hear, we don't have anything to do with Common Core. Go talk to the state board. And it just kind of goes around in a circle. So public-private partnerships function outside our system of checks and balances. They are promoting unproven and untested reform initiatives that profit them and them only at our expense. So these are actually federal subsidies to private interest groups. So tonight, I hope that we go out and we ask a few questions. What happened to our parental rights? Computer-adapted tests to be aligned to Common Core cost Utah almost $39 million. A 15-member panel are the only ones who have access to the test items, but not all test questions. So, as has historically been the case, at some point, like you could request your child's ACT scores or things. We'll probably still be able to do that. But as far as the Common Core aligned tests, they're now only going to be accessible by a 15-member panel. And I forget, do you remember there's 5 that are chosen?
All appointed.
They're all appointed.
Some are appointed by the school board and some are appointed by the
Business committee.
legislature,
Yeah.
businesses.
Okay.
So you
So,
won't know your children's test scores?
well, you'll know their test scores, but you won't know what they're being asked.
Oh, what?
You won't know what the test items are, what they're being tested on.
Well, and besides that you won't see the questions, think about if the people that are pushing the reforms are also the same players that are having this secret nature of a testing and you don't actually see the test, who determines whether or not the test score is actually accurate or skewed? I mean, it's just, it's speculative, but if we don't see it or have control, then it lends itself to being manipulated.
Right, it's the test maker has all control. I mean, I got my child's report back, and I looked at it, and, they put her in a percentile or whatever, but what does that mean? I don't even know what she was tested on. I don't know what to help her with. The teacher doesn't know what she was asked in the computer-adapted test. There are over 10,000 test bank items in the test that my child's school is using. And so there's no way, even if a teacher were in a computer lab and decided that they were going to start sneaking and looking at test questions, would they ever really be able to know what they all are? So the reason I have this little stop sign is because I'm choosing, and I think this is one thing that parents might want to consider, to opt out of the computer-adapted tests associated with Common Core. And I think if more parents decide to make that statement, that maybe our legislators will see that another pathway to college needs to be given to our children. So will we lose local control sooner than we think? Last spring, or in February, I got a mailer from my representative, and it said that he was staying awake at night because by 2022, almost 80% of Utah's budget will be used to administer Obamacare. And so, what does that mean for education dollars in the state of Utah? If we keep allowing ourselves as states to be beholden to our need for federal dollars, I think in my view, this is a game changer for education reform. I think it should be a game changer for the way states view federal funding. And so I hope, again, I think that's my last slide, that we will leave here tonight and just consider where our power lies. I was appreciative of Allison bringing up our Utah Constitution. We need to get familiar with what that says, what our rights are. We have the unalienable right to direct the educations of our children. And it's not for the federal government to decide where they're going to allocate resources and what's in the best interest of our child. And they don't even know and love like we do. So thank you.